Hello, it's Dr. Reckinger. I'm here to give you guys some example uh, programming assignments. The idea is to go through some examples with you to give you some um, more practice on developing algorithms. So I'm going to do one where I write a code that's focused on using for loops and if statements and when you would need to use those. And then another one where we'll do a while loop, a code that you need a while loop for. So this one is on for and if statements, and I'm going to go through the steps that we gave you guys the first day of class to start working through logic. So this is kind of new because the previous assignments you've done didn't have a lot of logic. It was more getting used to some of the syntax and the tools and just the environment. And this is, we're really getting into needing to really think through the problem before you start programming. And so I hope this can kind of help you get some more practice and give you some more examples of how to do that. So I'm going to first do the first step, which is to read the problem statement. So I didn't write out a lot of details here to just keep it kind of concise, but what we're going to be writing here is a code that's able to take an array of grades or scores and categorize them into A, B, C, D, or F with the conditions that I have here, and then also count how many were in each grade category. So this is a categorizing algorithm, and it's also a counting algorithm, and they're two very typical algorithms that you'll see in a lot of the codes that we're going to be writing in this class. So what I'm going to do is first start by writing out the steps that I would take as a human to solve this problem. So if I had this set of data here and I wanted to put it into these categories, the first thing I would do is I would start at the first number, and then I would compare that number to each of the categories ranges. So I would say, is 98 in between 90 and 100? Yes. So then I could stop. Is 50 between 90 and 100? No. And then I would check the next one. No, 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 and then I would see it was below 60. So I'd put it in this last category. So I would step through each one and see which category it fit into. So step one, I would say, in this case, is to compare the first element, or the first score, to the condition in each category. And then once I find the category, I would create a new array and place that score into that array. So that is categorizing, which is actually putting the score into a new array. And then it also says that I need to count the scores. So once I put it into a new array, I would also add one to a counter to track how many. So I would do that all for the first score, and then I would repeat 1 and 3 for each score left in the array. So I really was only doing maybe 3 things, and I was doing those things all to the first one, and then I just need to keep doing that same exact thing to each of the scores in the array. And then if I wanted to tell someone my results, which is typically what you want to do in a code, is at the end you want to report something back, then I would display results or show results or something. So those are my human steps of what I would do to solve this problem. And so that is always a good place to start. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert those human steps into things that I know the computer can do. So the first step, compare the first score to the condition in the category, is a relational condition. So it's taking two things and comparing them. So in this case, the condition is going to be like a less than or greater than in every of the 5 conditions. And so I just need to set up relational conditions for each of those score ranges. Second step is an array definition. So there'll be, in each case, there'll be 5 of these. So I need 5 relational conditions for each score category, and then I'll need 5 new arrays for each to store each array in. And then I will create a counter and I will not only define a counter, but then I'm also going to need to advance it once the category was met. And since there's 5 different groups, I'll have to have 5 different counters. Anytime you see something as a repeat, anytime you're doing something a set number of times, so in this case, we know that we have to repeat the same thing the amount of times that the length of the array is, then you should always go to for loop. So a for loop is the loop that you'll use when you have a predetermined number of times something needs to be repeated. And a while loop is one where you will do do it when there's a condition that needs to be met, which I'll show you next time. And then finally, we'll want to display our results, and in some case that will be a plot. In some cases it'll be a plot, in some cases it will be just printing something to the screen. In some cases it might be some other visual representation of the results. In this case, we're just going to display our groups and our counting to the screen. So as I'm thinking about this a little bit more, since I know I'm going to do this as a repeat loop, a for loop, I know that inside of that loop then my relational condition will need to be inside an if statement, because that's the way to check something and only have the things that meet that condition go in there. And so because we're going to be repeating this for a lot of different scores, there's going to be only one condition met out of the 5 every time. So we only want we only want to go into those conditions if the category is met. So I'm going to move over to Matlab now. From here, you can actually write down a pseudocode, and I'm going to do that in Matlab, but I'm going to remain in Matlab syntax just so that I can be kind of consistent with the code. But if you want, you can just write out a pseudocode where you don't worry about being exactly correct first. And so what I'm going to do is anytime I have a code that has a for loop, I always start by just writing in that for loop where I have the beginning and the end of the for loop defined, because it's just a good structure to start the code off with. I'm going to copy over my array of grades over into Matlab, and I know that I'm going to have to run my loop for the entire length of the array. So that means I'm going to start the loop at 1, and I'm going to end the loop at the length of grades. Length of grades will be whatever the total number of elements in that array is if it's a 1D array. So that's the easiest way to measure the total number of elements. Size can also be used, but it's it has multiple. It's not. It comes out as an array, not as a single number. All right, so I know I need this for loop, and then the first step was this relational condition. So that's going to be inside the for loop. So for each score, I'm going to check to see which condition it meets. So that means I'm going to need 5 conditions. So that's going to be an if, else if times 4 condition. So if my grades are less than or equal to 100 and greater than or equal to, and I'll just do greater than 90 and I'll have equal to be at the end. I would be clear in a problem statement that I gave you, but this is just a little sample problem. So I'm going to have 90 and below be the B's. So if it's greater than 90, then it's an A. So I'm going to just go ahead and create the rest of these. And then I'm going to end. So I'm going to have 5 of these. Now, right now I just wrote in grades in general to show you just the relational condition. But remember that we're stepping through these one at a time. So we first want to do the first one. So let's walk through what the for loop does. The for loop is going to take this array that you have on the right side of the for loop, and it's going to run the for loop for every element of the array. So right now I have an array that goes from 1 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So it's going to go from 1 to 13. So I is going to be 1, and then it'll run through everything inside it. And then I is going to be 2, and it's going to run through and do everything inside it. And it's going to repeat until I equals 13. So it'll do this whole thing 13 times. So what we're trying to do in this relational condition is check to see if each element meets that condition. So if we want to check the first one, then we would put a 1 here. Right, so this would just check to see if the first one meets that condition. If we wanted to check the second one, we would put a 2 here. If we wanted to check the third one, we would put a 3 here. And so it would go through and check each one. But the whole reason of putting it in a loop is that I will be those numbers. I will start out as 1, it'll run through, and then it will go to 2, and then it will run through. So you can actually just put I here. And so every time that the loop runs, this I will change from 1 to 13, and it will check each element. So we will go ahead and copy this to each line underneath that's the same. So this one is from 90 to 100, and the next one for B is 80 to 90. So we will just change this to 90 and change this to 80. This will be 70, 60, and so on. The last one is a little different because it's just if grades of I are below 60. So if it's less than or equal to 60, then that's going to be the F category. So now we have our relational condition inside an if statement done. We've determined the kind of buckets that you're going to throw each score into if they meet that condition. So now we decided that once we find that it's in one of these categories, we want to place it in a new array that keeps track of that. So for this, we're just going to create some arrays. And for right now, we're just going to create empty arrays and add to them. So I'm going to need 5 arrays. So I've just created variable names. I just made these up. You can use whatever variable names you want. And if a score meets this condition, that means it's an A score, So I want to take the A scores array and I want to add that grade to it. So this is going to be a growing array because we don't know how many scores there are. And so you'll see a warning here because it says that the array is changing at every loop, because that's a very expensive thing for Matlab to be doing. But that's actually the only way to write this algorithm. So it's okay that you have that warning. So we're going to repeat the same thing for each condition. So if it meets any condition, you're going to add that grade into that condition. So I'm going to just copy and paste all of these in and change them to their appropriate category. And this condition where you're adding something on to itself is a really useful thing to get used to doing. We're going to be doing stuff like this a lot. So creating an empty array and then adding on to it is what we're doing here. So you're taking A scores, you're putting it in an array, you're putting the array in it and the next score, so it'll just keep adding on to it. And we do want to suppress all these lines of definition, otherwise you're going to get a lot printing out each time you run it. So we created the array up here, we initialized it to just empty, and then we added on to it inside each if statement within the for loop. So we did step 2. Step 3 is to define a counter and advance the counter when the condition is met. So the same thing here is that we're going to have to create a counter, and a counter is just going to store the number of times that condition was met. So my counter for grades A will be CTA for count A, and I'm going to initialize that number to 0. So then when I get into the condition where the grades are in the A category, I'm going to add 1 to it. So I'm, again, similar to adding onto the array, here I'm just adding 1 to the counter itself. And we will do this all the time to do counters. And then you'll just repeat the same thing for each grade category. And then I will just repeat here with the advancement of the counter. One thing I'm not doing a great job of is running this code as I'm writing it, because I already have done this before, so I know how it works. But when you're writing codes like this, you should run it periodically to make sure that it's working as you add stuff to it. So what I'll do now is I'll give it a shot, but I'm going to show you how to maybe comment some stuff out and try it before we run the whole thing together. So let's check that we did all of our steps. We have 1, 2, 3. The for loop is the first one we did, and the only thing we don't have is showing the results of in some way. So to show the results, we would actually need to show all of these different arrays that we created. There's a lot of better ways to do this and create them in a more succinct way, but the point of this was to talk about logic, not to talk about the most efficient way to do it, memory-wise and stuff like that. So for now, I'm just going to show how many A's there were, because we can just check that. So if we count it here, there should be 1, 2, 3, 4 A's. So that should be the answer that you get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment stuff out and run this step by step just to see how it's working and to show you how you might be able to do this. So I commented out most of the logic that we wrote, and so I'm just going to run this code, and I should expect nothing to happen because all right, so I'm going to run the code now. So what I did here is I have commented out the code, and I'm going to uncomment it step by step. In the next video, I'll try to show you how you should actually be writing it and running it as you are writing. But for this one, I'll just do it step by step with comments. So I ran the first 11 lines here. These are all just definition lines. So nothing prints because everything is suppressed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by showing the loop. So what I'm going to do is run the code with the loop on only, and I'm going to comment everything inside the loop, and I'm going to print out the index that it's at in the loop. So here you can see that every time the loop is run, the only thing that happens in the loop is that the index of the loop is printed. So it starts at 1 and it ends at 13 because that's the length of the array. So that's exactly what I wanted to do, is run 13 times. So I'm going to delete that, uncomment it, and uncomment the center. So now I'm just going to put in this whole thing. It's very likely that when you type stuff like this that there's a lot of mistakes you can make just from typos. So I'm going to run this, and I should expect nothing to be printed because everything is suppressed. And now I'm going to show that last display to see if we get the right number of A's. So it should be 4 A's. So that's what we're getting. So I can print out the rest of them as well, just to give the count. And here I had 4 A's, 3 B's, 2 C's, 1 D, and 3 F's. And there's a lot of ways you can check to see if codes like this are working. Sum all these up. The sum should be 13, or the length of your array. You could check it just manually by looking at that. I'll just sum it, make sure it's 13. So inside the sum function, which we haven't done much with yet, you need to just put an array. So I'm going to put those 5 in an array. You can see that that is a sum of 13. So, and you know, there's a lot of other things you can do as well. But this is just as quick as I can make it. I know it's still really long. Example of how to write a MATLAB script where you need to develop an algorithm. Thanks.